For quoting Shakespeare, you will need to decide whether or not you are quoting in verse, which is poetry, or if you are quoting prose. And the way you tell the difference is really one way to tell is just to look at the page and see if the lines go all the way to the end or if they're broken up a bit. Another way you can tell is by looking to see if there is a particular rhythm for each line. Is it in iambic pentameter, which is a commonly used method that Shakespeare uses when he is writing poetry? So you might look for that if you're not sure. Truthfully, if you cite your lines like they are verse, I will not count off for that, so you're welcome to do that because it can be hard to tell. And my focus is on your interpretation of your specific theme that addresses the prompt you have chosen. So you are choosing from some that I have provided for you. If you're not choosing one of those, you will get it approved by me well before you even start researching. So we're going to just talk about quotations using the play Hamlet. So you'll make sure that you always integrate your quotations by introducing the quotation with your own words. And there are a variety of ways to do that. So if you use a verb of expression before the quotation, make sure that you say which character is speaking, use the verb of expression to say how the character is speaking, then use a comma after that verb of expression. Include the quotation. If it's a short quotation like this one, short meaning fewer than 3 lines or 3 or fewer lines, put no period at the end and put the period after the parenthetical citation. The parenthetical citation will include the act, Act 2, the scene, Scene 2, and line or lines. This is one line, it's line 190. Another way to introduce a source is to integrate it in a sentence that you have started yourself. This beginning of this sentence introducing a quotation has the quotation set up as a direct object. So use no comma after a noun or pronoun that comes before the quotation. Okay, so pay attention. Is it a verb of expression first or right before the quotation, or is it something else? Here's another way to introduce a quotation. This one is explicitly quoting lines of verse. This previous one is not quoting verse, it's quoting prose. So you see that it's just written out like you would quote anything else, but the parenthetical citation has act, scene, and line numbers. Here, because we know we're quoting verse, you will quote it just like you would any other poem with a forward slash between each line to show the line breaks. Another difference here is you have noticed that we did not end with punctuation before the parenthetical citation. We just put a period after the parenthetical citation in both of these cases. This one ends with an exclamation point. So if you have an exclamation point or you have a question mark at the end of your quotation, you leave that in there and then continue on with the period at the end of the parenthetical citation. You never want 2 periods, so you wouldn't want a period here and a period here. You just want the period after the parenthetical citation. A period means full stop, so we don't want to stop our full thought until we have told you where to find that quotation. So that's the reason for that. When you are quoting drama, and you can read this more slowly if you want, this is in a handout you've gotten online or in class. You can see how to quote the lines that are dialogue. So make sure that you give the person you are quoting or the character you're quoting credit with their name is in all caps, which is weird. Most of the time I will tell you if you see anything in all caps, it's like it's yelling. But when we are giving the character names to quote some dialogue, we use all caps, followed by a period, which I also find strange. But that's how it goes. It's also formatted like a blocked quotation, so you will hit tab twice and write the dialogue as you see it here, and then you have sort of the hanging indent thing happening if what you are quoting for one or more of the lines for the dialogue bleeds over to a second line. And that is also why the parenthetical citation at the end of all this, lines 103 through 110, is sort of on this line. If this were to end here, I could have it like if this line ended after better, I would have plenty of room to add the parenthetical citation at the end. So you can keep it on the same line as the last line of your block quotation. Another strange thing about block quotations is that the parenthetical citation, where I have been telling you to put the period at the end of the parenthetical citation, you don't do that for a block quotation. Also, a block quotation does not have quotation marks anywhere in it. The blocking is what tells the reader you're quoting something. So, again, using block quotation not only applies to quoting dialogue, but it also applies to quoting more than 4 lines of prose or more than 3 lines of poetry. You don't want to use a ton of long quotations in short essays, so keep that in mind. If you've used long quotations in your essay, make sure that your writing is the majority of the essay. You never want the quotations to be the real star of the show. You want your analysis, your contribution to the discussion to be the majority of the writing. So the general rule is for every 3 lines you have quoted, you should have 7 lines that are your own writing, expressing your own ideas or reacting to what you've quoted in some way, so that your essay is 70% your own words. Okay, so make sure you pay attention to focusing on your explanations and reactions and contributions to the discussion. Don't just string a bunch of quotes together and call it a day. Here's an example of a block quotation that is a block quotation of prose, so not poetry. You can see how the lines just go all the way to the end. And this ends with a question mark, but even if it were to end with a period, I would still put the lines I have quoted here. You'll notice that I have a comma here because I have left out a few words. So I put the ... or ellipses there to indicate for my reader where I have left something out. And it's really just apparently the end or beginning between these 2 lines here. Here is quoting more than 3 lines of verse. So you do the block format, which means no quotation marks anywhere, and end the quotation with whatever punctuation happens to be there, and no period at the end here. So you can think of it, if you have quotation marks, then you put the period after the parenthetical citation, because quotation marks means it's not a block quotation. If you don't have quotation marks, it is generally a block quotation, and you can tell because you have indented twice to make that block format. Sometimes you will quote some dialogue that is not in a work of Shakespeare maybe, or not in a play. You might quote some dialogue from a novel or something, or a short story, and that in that case that you might have a block quotation that also includes some quotation marks. So just pay extra attention to any samples that you have so you can make sure that you are following the guidelines put forth by your instructor. So here is another sample of a block quotation. This is also verse. Again, I like to introduce my quotations using a full sentence if it's a block quotation. That's more formal. And this sample is just showing you how to always sandwich your quotes into writing that is your own. So giving some context before any quotation is always important so the reader is prepared to understand why you're quoting what you're quoting. Then give the quotation, which here is in a block format and appears after I have used a full sentence to introduce the quotation. Because this is a block quotation, I end with a period, no quotation marks anywhere, and there is no period after the parenthetical citation. That's only because this is in a block format. Other quotations that are standard shorter quotations do have the quotation marks and the period goes outside the parenthetical citation. The last part that you must always include when you're quoting something is an explanation. After you have quoted something, always explain or react to the thing you are quoting. Don't assume it's obvious, your connection between what you've quoted and the point you're trying to make. It's obvious to you, but just know that your reader doesn't find it obvious the same way you do. So you need to say what's in your head that makes it an obvious connection between what you've quoted, especially from the primary source, connecting that to any secondary sources you have used to either agree with or disagree with your secondary sources. You can add or omit words in your quotations. If you want to add words, you can use square brackets to replace or clarify words. So you really could replace he with Shakespeare in square brackets, but you could also have started the quotation here at has and just added Shakespeare before the quotation, so you wouldn't have to use the square brackets, but this is a sample that's trying to show you how to use square brackets. To leave things out, you just put the ... or ellipses to show the reader you have left something out. Now you cannot add or leave out words that will change the meaning of what you're quoting. It should really just make your point stronger, make your point more concise, so you don't have the reader bogged down in a whole bunch of extra stuff that wasn't needed or necessary to make your point. Ooh, maybe I can talk. So generally, I don't use quotation or ellipses at the end of a quotation. I generally feel it's implied, but you may have learned to do it this way, so it's okay if you do. But generally, it's not needed. So make sure that you definitely use the rest of the punctuation as needed. This one's a little bit of an iffy one. Do end with quotation marks and a period after your parenthetical citation. Using signal phrases is essential. This is a more formal integration. Using a full sentence before a quotation means instead of using a comma before the quotation, you will use a colon. Shorter signal phrases will often be followed by a comma, but it depends on the structure of your sentence. So in this case, you will need a comma. If you use the word that before a quotation, the word that does the same job as a comma, so you don't need to use a comma in addition to the word that. It's just redundant. So works cited is important. Here's a sample of works cited. This is a film, so if you cite a film, make sure that you use the appropriate works cited information for that. Here's a sample of quoting or using the works cited source information needed for a work from an anthology, and you should be using Hamlet from the anthology unless you've been instructed to use another source. I believe the updated version of the anthology we will use next semester does not have Hamlet in it, so we'll be using another source. Here's how to cite the secondary source or a dictionary definition.